Between 1500 and 1700, North America saw one of the most dramatic and, frankly, violent transformations in human history. We're talking about entire societies being completely shattered and brand new ones being built from scratch, forging a world of really stark contrasts and brutal new realities. So let's dive in and figure out how this all went down.
So how was the New World won? I mean, how did a few rival European empires manage to stamp their authority on this vast continent? Well, the answer isn't as simple as you might think. It's not just a story of conquest. It's a messy story of competing dreams, unintended consequences, and absolutely catastrophic change.
Okay, first things first, you've got to get this picture out of your head of Europeans stepping onto an empty continent. It was anything but. This place was home to powerful native confederacies. You know, if you look at John Smith's own map from 1622, he literally draws the great leader Powhatan ruling over his domain. This was not an empty wilderness. It was a complex political world where the English were just one tiny, vulnerable group trying to survive.
And it wasn't just one group of Europeans showing up. You had four major players: the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English. And they all arrived with their own plans, their own goals, and, crucially, their own Old World rivalries that they were more than happy to continue in the New World.
So what you end up with is this map of North America that looks like a messy, overlapping patchwork of competing claims. These were not neat, tidy borders. They were tense, violent frontiers, a kind of geopolitical free-for-all where European powers fought each other and powerful native nations had to figure out how to navigate this new reality, playing them off each other, sometimes through war, sometimes through alliances, all to protect their own land and their own power.
Now, what's really key here is that each of these empires came with a totally different blueprint for colonization, a different game plan for how they were going to make money and how they were going to deal with the people already living there. And when you look at this, the differences are just huge. The Spanish were all about gold, glory, and God. They were after precious metals and wanted to convert everyone to Catholicism, which pretty much always meant conquest and subjugation. But then you've got the French and the Dutch. For them, it was all about business, specifically the fur trade. And for that, you need Native Americans as partners, as suppliers, even as military allies. And then there are the English, who are kind of a mix. They wanted to make money, but many also wanted religious freedom. And as we'll see, their approach to native peoples ultimately boiled down to constant expansion and war over land. So, these completely different approaches ended up creating vastly different societies on the ground. To really get a handle on this, we've got to zoom in on the English, because even within their own colonies, two radically different models popped up that would literally shape the future of the entire continent. So right from the get-go, you see this massive split between the Chesapeake and New England. In the Chesapeake, think Virginia, the goal was simple: get rich. It attracted a flood of young, single men, many of them indentured servants, all hoping to strike it big growing tobacco. But New England was a completely different story. It was settled by Puritan families searching for religious purity. They didn't build giant plantations. They built small towns centered on the church and family farms. These two models created the fault lines for what would one day become the American South and the American North. That whole commercial dream in the Chesapeake, it almost died before it even got started. I mean, just listen to this quote from George Percy. He's describing the winter of 1609 in Jamestown, a period they called the starving time. It was just absolute desperation and starvation. The whole colony was on the verge of collapse. And then one thing saved it: tobacco.
But growing tobacco is incredibly labor-intensive. So how do you get enough people to do the work? Well, the initial solution wasn't slavery. It was this system called indentured servitude. Basically, poor folks in England would sign a contract, trading 5 to 7 years of their life as a laborer in exchange for a ticket to America and hopefully some land of their own when they were done. And for a while, this system worked and fueled a massive tobacco boom.
But you can probably see the fatal flaw here, right? What happens when thousands of these former servants finish their time? Now you've got a massive population of poor, armed men who all want the land they were promised. In 1676, that tension just exploded into Bacon's Rebellion, a super violent uprising where poor white and black former servants actually united against the wealthy planter elite.
And this is the moment everything changes. The planter elite are absolutely terrified by this rebellion. So to make sure it never happens again, they make a very deliberate choice. They ditch indentured servitude and create a brand new labor system, one based on race: chattel slavery. By making new laws that defined Africans as property for life, they got a permanent, controllable workforce. And, crucially, it drove a wedge between poor whites and blacks, uniting all white people, rich and poor, around this new idea of racial hierarchy.
Okay, so while all this internal drama is unfolding in the colonies, there's a much bigger struggle going on. The almost constant state of war and trade between all the European powers and the Native American nations, who, let's not forget, still controlled most of the continent.
And just like with their colonies, each empire's blueprint led to a totally different kind of conflict. The Spanish obsession with converting people sparked the massive Pueblo Revolt, which was so successful it actually kicked them out of New Mexico for 12 years. The French and Dutch, with their fur trade, armed their native allies, which ended up fueling these devastating wars between tribes, like the Beaver Wars. And for the English, well, their relentless hunger for more and more land just led to one brutal war after another.
King Philip's War in New England was on another level. It was this massive, coordinated uprising by native tribes that destroyed half of the English frontier towns. Now, the colonists did eventually win, but the war was so incredibly bloody and brutal that it just poisoned the relationship forever. After that, English writers started describing all native people as these bloodthirsty savages, which really cemented this new, vicious kind of racial hatred.
So you fast forward to the year 1700, and the continent is just unrecognizable. The collision of these worlds had consequences for everyone, European, African, and Native American, and it changed every single aspect of life.
We often talk about this as the Columbian Exchange, this huge transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and technology. But it was so much more than just swapping stuff. It literally reshaped the environment. The crazy demand for beaver pelts led to overhunting that wrecked whole ecosystems. And European animals, like pigs, just ran wild, devouring the food sources that native animals depended on.
But the single biggest weapon, the most devastating part of this whole exchange, was completely invisible. It was European diseases, smallpox, measles, the flu, things native people had zero immunity to. In many communities, especially along the coast, the death rate is estimated to have been as high as 90%. Just let that sink in. This wasn't just a loss of people. It was the shattering of entire societies, the loss of elders, of knowledge, of traditions, on a scale that is almost impossible to imagine.
And that loss wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. This quote from Pope, the leader of that Pueblo revolt, it says it all. Forcing a new religion on people wasn't just about changing their beliefs. It was about severing their connection to their entire worldview, to their culture, to their ancestors. It was a kind of cultural death.
And so, this is the world they built. By 1700, this brutal race-based system of chattel slavery wasn't just some temporary fix. It was the law. It became the economic engine of the colonies, a system where human gains and their children and their children's children were legally defined as property, forever.
So yeah, a new world was definitely created between 1500 and 1700. A world of global trade, new technologies, new societies. But it was built on a foundation of mass death, of cultural destruction, and a system of human bondage that would haunt the continent for centuries to come. The real question we're left with is, what was the full cost?